so I guess we're going to start. So, hello and welcome everyone to the School of Continuing Studies today, and happy Tuesday to everybody. I hope everyone is doing well today. I am Ina Popova, Director of Professional and Corporate Education at the School of Continuing Studies, and today we're going to be talking about remote work and managing remote teams. And our guest speaker today is a professional and personal coach, an entrepreneur, and an author and a speaker, and also an educator who teaches at McGill School of Continuing Studies and at McGill HR for McGill employees, Mr. Robert Wise, who will share with us his insights on how we can all work better remotely. So Robert, the stage is yours.
Thank you so much, Ina. So welcome everybody. Thank you for joining us on this Tuesday afternoon. I'm excited to talk about this. Is actually a really important topic. It's how do you manage your remote team when you're how do you manage a team that's working remotely? So I'm gonna go through some strategies and give you some meat and potatoes on how to do this and how to do this effectively. So just so you guys know, just so everybody knows, just so everybody knows, you could question me anytime throughout the presentation. Feel free. If I could answer it at the time, I will, or I'll wait till later, but just feel free to write questions as they arise. Okay, so let's get started. Okay, so I mean, ideally, yes, it's preferable, you know, when you're going to be working remotely that you prepare for remote working. But unfortunately, these times have been very, let's just say, very chaotic. And all of a sudden, we are now dealing with working remotely without planning for it. So it all kind of happened quite quickly. So I'm hoping that this presentation will help you, give you some strategies on how do you effectively manage a team remotely during these challenging times, because you guys, everybody didn't have time to prepare for this. This is something that's just been very instantaneous. So I'm going to give some strategies to help with that. So let's look at some of the common challenges of remote working. So some of the common challenges are lack of face-to-face supervision. Both managers and their employees often express concerns about the lack of face-to-face interaction. There's a lack of access to information. So when you are working remotely, you don't have the same access to information that maybe you would have had if you were working at the office. Let's say you needed to get a file, but now you can't get the file, you have to ask somebody for it. So the information is not as accessible as it was before. So another common challenge is research has shown a lack of mutual knowledge among remote workers, which means that a lot of people are just not communicating with each other enough, and that they're not sharing enough knowledge with each other. So I might not know what she's doing, he might not know what I'm doing, this one might not know what we're doing. So there is a lack of mutual knowledge. This is a big one, and I covered this at the workshop yesterday. The mind traps, which are cognitive distortions that we fall into that lead to a negative emotion. So I do want to touch on this a little briefly, because this is actually important. Common mind traps when working remotely that I have been seeing from people has been jumping to conclusions, should statements, and mind reading. So I'll just go very briefly with what each one of these means, and maybe you can relate to them when it comes to your team. Jumping to conclusions is, let's say somebody didn't answer your email back or gave you a one-liner. You may jump to a conclusion that, oh, they don't care, I'm not top priority, they're not getting back to me, they don't think it's important. So we might jump to a conclusion that might not necessarily be true. It's possible they didn't even get the email. It's possible they didn't have time to read it yet because they're working on another project. So we have to be mindful that we don't jump to conclusions, especially when we're working remotely. When we are not able to see the person, we jump to conclusions about the person and what they're doing. We might even jump to a conclusion, oh, they're probably not working. They're probably doing this. They're probably on the phone. So we have to be mindful not to jump to conclusions. Should statements is another big one. You know, I'm doing this, she should be doing that. He's doing that, he shouldn't be doing this. So a lot of should statements are also being made during this time. And mind reading. Oh, I know she's thinking I'm not doing enough work. Oh, he probably thinks that I didn't care about this project. So just be mindful that we don't fall into these mind traps. A way to challenge these mind traps is to ask yourself, what evidence do I have to prove any of these to be true? So when you jump to a conclusion, just because Susie didn't answer your email, it doesn't mean she doesn't care. Should statements. You might think Tony shouldn't do that, but what evidence do you have that says he shouldn't do it? And what can be done rather than judge the action? For mind reading, you want to make sure that you're not mind reading something that you don't know to be true. Like Tony's not answering my email, he probably thinks I'm not important. You don't know that to be true. So you want to be very mindful that you're not falling into these mind traps. And if you are, to make sure that you're challenging them with evidence and with facts. Let's not jump to conclusions. Let's not use should statements, and let's not mind read. Let's be aware of those thoughts so we don't fall into those traps. So another common issue with the remote working is social isolation. Loneliness is one of the most common complaints about remote work, with employees missing the informal social interaction of office meetings. Of course, we have the distractions at home. Under ideal situations, remote workers would have a dedicated workspace and adequate childcare. Even in normal circumstances, family and home demands can impinge on remote work. So you can imagine now when people they may not necessarily have a remote workspace. They may not have access now to daycare. Managers need to expect these distractions to be greater during this unplanned work from home situation and have some empathy for the situation. So it's not an ideal situation for a lot of people because they haven't prepared for it. So we need to be mindful of the fact that this is really sudden. We might not have a workspace dedicated to work. We may not have access to people to take care of our children. So we have to be somewhat accommodating to this new workspace. So this goes to a very important topic on flexibility and consistency. So I want to touch here on mental health. I got a question today. I did a workshop this morning on mental health, and somebody said to me, Rob, what do you consider to be mental health? So I'm going to tell you my short answer. To me, rigidity is a sign of poor mental health. It means you're only able to see things black or white, all or nothing, good or bad. Flexibility is the ability to see outside the lines. It's to be able to adjust, to move, to find solutions. So it's really important to be flexible. To me, a sign of good mental health is flexibility. So although, situations are difficult, we need to still be flexible. We need to find solutions that are adjustable, solution focused, not looking at things rigid. So flexibility and consistency are two key components that I'm going to be really supportive of in terms of working from a remote place. You want to be flexible and consistent. So flexible managers treat employees as individuals and make an effort to accommodate personal styles and needs. Managers who are flexible provide workers with a greater latitude about the way they accomplish goals. However, let's be clear, flexibility works both ways. So if you're being flexible, the employee also needs to be flexible too. They need to be able to say, okay, you know what, I have to take care of my kids between this time and this time, but I can do this and this. How does that sound to you? So flexibility is both ways. You ask, they ask, you guys move together. It's kind of like a partnership in terms of like, well, what can I do? What can you do? How do we work together to make this work? Now let's talk about consistency. Consistency is also really important, especially now that people are working remotely. There needs to be a consistent engagement and a consistent expectation. So a really important research tool is to do check-ins. Many successful remote managers establish a daily call with their remote employees. You want to do daily check-ins. I would even schedule those check-ins for a specific time because routine is also key. So remember to establish daily check-ins. Let people know, I'm going to do a check-in. I want to make sure we're all on the same page. What's the agenda? It doesn't have to be a long check-in, but check-ins are really important. Even if you just want to call about a status, just want to know how things are going, where is the status on some of the stuff that we're working on, check-ins daily. So let's talk about different forms of communication. Email alone is not sufficient. It's just not. It's a great tool, but it's not sufficient on its own. Remote workers benefit more from video conferencing that gives participants many visual cues, and they are able to have that connection that they wouldn't have via an email. Let's talk about tone. You can't tell a tone of a person through an email. So people, unfortunately, like I said in an earlier slide, they may do mind reading. They may jump to a conclusion. But when you do a visual conferencing, you're able to see the person, you're able to communicate with the person, you kind of know their tone, you know if something is urgent, if it's not urgent. So video conferencing is a much better communication technology option than just an email, unless it's just a really quick thing. But if it's something that you really need to talk to the person about, you're much better off doing it through video conferencing or facial cues alone. So how to manage your team is to also establish the rules of engagement. For example, video conferencing for daily check-in meetings, but maybe you want to do instant message when something is urgent. Ideally, managers will establish these rules of engagement with employees as soon as possible. So establish the ways you guys are going, the way everyone's going to engage with everybody. You want to see the best method for check-ins, the best methods for your daily meetings. What is the best way for us to engage? So I'm going to just give you guys, everybody here, a poll about which way that you all like to communicate. So what is your ideal way, or your preferred method of communication? Is it video conference, telephone, email, text messages? How do you like to be communicated to? So let's take this poll. Okay. Okay, so it looks like, I'm just gonna wait a few more seconds. Okay, interesting. So it looks like the #1 method of communication is video conference. Yeah, there's the winner. So video conference is the #1 method. #2 is email. Then we have text message, and then we have telephone. Okay, perfect. So you need to know the most effective way that your team likes to communicate. So this is actually a great idea to do a poll and ask your team, what is the ideal way for us to communicate? How would you like us to do our daily check-ins? How would you like to communicate during, you know, a 5-minute conversation? Would it rather be by telephone or by email or by video conference? Okay, perfect. Okay, perfect. So let your employees know. Be aware of the communication among team members to ensure that they are sharing information as needed, and encourage feedback and discussion amongst your team. Ask them questions. It is such a good tool to ask. What kind of method do you like? How do you prefer to be communicated to? I'm just trying to, oh, do I have a chat? Okay, perfect. Okay. My next. Perfect. So, excuse me. Okay. So this is also crucial. I mean, right now we are living in times where we're lacking that social interaction. When you're working remotely, you just don't feel that team spirit because the team is just not there. So a really great tool, which I find to be really helpful, is to do a social interaction like like a Zoom meeting with all the people. You know, it's kind of like, let's just do a check-in right before we start the meat and potatoes. Let's just do, how are you doing? What's going on with you? What are you struggling with? What are you excited about? So have some informal conversations about non-work topics while working remotely. Because what you also want to do is you want to boost the morale, and you want to boost that team morale. And it's challenging to do when you're not in an office, and you're not in an environment where you're not able to socially interact. So create this team meeting in which you are engaging in non-work topics. I actually like to do this with my team. We'll have a morning coffee together, and we'll just talk about some topics that are on our mind, and we'll start to share some ideas that are not work related, just to kind of have that social interaction and build that team spirit. Okay. Offer encouragement and emotional support. In the context of an abrupt shift to remote work, it is important for managers to acknowledge stress, listen to employees' anxieties and concerns, and emphasize with their struggle. You know, it's really nice for you guys for everybody, to do a check-in in which you say, how are you finding this remote work situation? How are you doing? What's going on with you? What are your challenges? It is such a great key component to communication is to ask. So I'm a coach, and one of the biggest tools I like to do as a coach is to be curious about the people I'm talking to, working with, my clients, and the way to be curious is to ask questions. So be curious about your team members. How are you doing? What's going on? Is there anything I can help you with? Is there anything that you're struggling with? A big how are you will go a long way to feel connected and for your team to feel supported. So research on emotional intelligence and emotional contagion tells us that employees look to their managers for cues about how to react to sudden changes or crisis situations. If a manager communicates stress and helplessness, this will have a trickle-down effect on their employees. It's really important. You will set the tone. The leader sets the tone for the team. If they're stressed and they're anxious and they're feeling overwhelmed, their team is going to feel that. If they feel calm, they feel we've got this, then their team is going to feel that too. So it's really important that you set the tone. So let's go through the emotional, I'm just going to move that here. So let's go through the emotional intelligence competencies. Number one, self-awareness. Being emotional self-aware. Be aware of your own emotions. How are you feeling? So if you're feeling anxious, what can you do to start to feel better? So I'll give you an example. Let's say that you have to call one of your team members and you're feeling anxious about the situation. Well, what can you do to feel better about the situation before you call your team member? So the first thing to do is be aware of your own emotional reactions to make sure that when you react to the employee, that you're in a good headspace. Like I said in yesterday's training, it's a really good tool to take a breath first, recognize that you're feeling anxious or stressed, take a breath, and what can you do to feel better about the situation before you call the employee? So we take a breath. Self-management is another key component. Emotional self-control, adaptability, achievement orientation, positive outlook. So if you look at things negatively, if you look at things stressful, that will have a negative, stressful outtake on the people you're talking to. So find a positive way to look at things. So I talk about optimism versus pessimism. Find ways to find the positive in things that may seem very stressful or very demanding. Well, what's the positive way about looking at this? Perfect. Okay. Social awareness. This is a key component, which is empathy. Empathy is huge. What is empathy? So I guess I'm just getting a lot of very useful. These people so cool. Oh, my pleasure. Oh, sorry. Perfect. Good. I keep going back. Okay. So empathy. Empathy is a key component. I want to be very clear what empathy is. So a lot of people are not really sure 100% what is empathy. How do I show empathy? So empathy is the ability to understand somebody's situation. So if somebody on your team says to you, I'm really, really stressed. My kids are up all night. I'm exhausted. Empathy would be your ability to say, I could understand. I can understand how that can be really stressful. I hear you. So empathy is having that empathetic way of communicating, that the person knows that you hear them, that you understand them, that you're not dismissing your feelings. So empathy is a key component, and I just want to talk very briefly about having empathy and focus. So let's talk about empathy and let's talk about focus. If somebody on your team is telling you that they are struggling, they are having trouble with their kids, they're having trouble with their partner, they're having trouble with deadlines or reaching deadlines, I would like you to practice something that is called empathy and focus. So we want to make sure that we have balanced empathy and focus, because this is where people do get into a little bit of trouble. There is something called too much empathy. Too much empathy is when you're like, oh, I totally get it. Just whenever you get it done, you get it done. That's too much empathy. Too much focus is, okay, I need that project done by Friday. It needs to be done. No excuses. That has to be done. So you want to have what's called balanced empathy and focus. Balanced empathy and focus means you're going to be able to say, I get it. I understand. It's really stressful. It's a really hard time that you're struggling with meeting deadlines. What can you do, or what can be done so that deadline can be achieved? So you're showing them empathy, but you're also focused on the fact that I still need that project to be accomplished and done. So that's about empathy and focus. Now to go to relationship management, influence, coach and mentor, conflict management, teamwork, inspirational leadership. Be a coach to your team. A coach looks for strategies. A coach looks for, let's win. Let's find a solution. Let's be strategic. So now your team, they're working remotely. They need you to be that coach. They need you to be like, okay, Susie, if you work on this project, Tony, you do this. We meet up at this time. Let's get this done. How does that sound to you? Now, I want to just explain something about coaching. Coaching also has a really soft feel to it in terms of leadership style. It's not so directive, it's kind of more collaborative. I'll give you an example of what I mean when you're a coach, okay? When you're doing a coaching style. It's kind of like, okay, so what do you think about this? Susie would work on this, Tony would work on that, how does that sound? So what you're doing is you're kind of collaborating, you're asking questions, you're working together. So although you are the leader, you are coaching them to help them and to get their input on your ideas. So this feels very collaborative, and I think that's a really great approach, is to feel like it's a collaborative approach. So a coach will ask questions like, how does that sound? What do you think of this? How does this sound for a strategy? Basically, you're asking questions and you're coaching them to help you help them. Perfect. If you have any questions, please feel free to write me in a question. If there's something that you're going, that's something that you want to talk about, my pleasure to help you with that. Okay, I got a question. Any tips how to keep introvert colleagues engaged, motivated, or am I misreading disinterest because I am extrovert? You know, the way to keep anybody engaged, I'm going to tell you, the way to keep anybody engaged is to be collaborative, to ask people questions, to ask people opinions. Let's not jump to conclusions. This one's an introvert, this one's an extrovert. Let's be collaborative. So what I would suggest is find ways to bring people in. Find ways to bring out the best in them. Regardless of their personality style, ask them questions. This is actually a great tool for you, is to ask this person, what do you think of that? How would you like this? What do you think of this? So you're kind of bringing them in and engaging them. A lot of times with people who are introvert, they have trouble engaging. So it's good for you to just bring them in and help them engage. So I was talking about And another one of my workshops is judgment. And when we put a judgment on a person, we might treat them differently because we see them differently. So let's not look at people as introverts or extroverts. Let's look at them as they're my teammates, and I want them to feel valued. I want them to feel appreciated, and I want them to feel like they're part of the team. That's key, is to include them. So I would suggest to be very inclusive. Perfect. Okay. So this is a very, very important tool for people to do, teams, individuals, everybody to do. It is that positive affirmation. It's that we can do this, we got this. So using phrases such as, this is tough, but we can handle it. Let's look for ways to use our strengths during this time. You know, with positive reinforcement, employees are more likely to take up the challenge with a sense of purpose and focus. So it's all how we speak to our team members. It's all how we convey the message. If we convey the message like, this is going to be tough, this is really hard, I don't know how we're going to get this done, this is overwhelming, there's just too much to do, well, they're going to feel that. So take the, we got this, we're going to find the solution attitude. Let's go team, we got this, we got it, we're in this together, we are a team. So we really want to build that team spirit, and as a leader, you're that rock, you're their go-to person. You set the tone, you set the behavior. If you're going to be scared, worried, anxious, they're going to pick that up. If you're going to say this is too much work, they're going to feel that. Okay. How does one best motivate an employee who normally delivers excellent work when in the office but seems to be less than responsive now that she's working from home? That is a great question, Susan. And I'm gonna tell you, that's a common question I get. So I'm gonna give you my coach answer, okay? I'm gonna give you my coach answer, which is, I would like you to be curious about the performance of this person, and I would ask them. I would actually say to them, I'm curious. I'm seeing a difference in the work that's being delivered. What's going on? I would try to understand what's happening. I wouldn't go in there. I want to be very clear. I would not go there with judgment. I would not go there with accusations. I would go in with the I'm curious. I'm just curious. So just so you all know, the word I'm curious is actually a softener. It basically softens the questions. It's like, oh, could you please help me understand? I'm noticing this, or I see that. I'm just curious what's happening here. So I would encourage you to ask the person. I would be curious about their performance. Oh, I'm curious. I see that when you're in the office, you're able to do this, this, and this, and at home you're doing this, this, and this. Is there anything that's changing? Is there something that's different? I'm just curious what's going on here. So I would ask. And by asking, just so you know, Susan, by asking, they're getting the idea that I'm aware of what's going on. So they also see that you are aware of the fact that there's a difference in their workload, and that will help them be more mindful of what they're doing and maybe how they're spending their time at work versus at home. So I hope that helped. Okay. So you want to create, so you want to create a true team spirit. When working virtually, it may take extra effort to keep people feeling committed. They need to know that they're not the only one contributing true value to the team. They need to know that not only they're contributing true value to the team's common goal, they are also valuable to the team's success in achieving its goals. So here is something that is very important to practice with your team. It's the celebrating part. So a lot of times we don't celebrate successes. We're like, okay, that was great, good, we got the goal done, perfect, but we don't celebrate it. So I would suggest finding ways to celebrate success. What we want to do is we want to make people feel that team spirit, like we got this team, and we need to celebrate successes. You know, we spend a lot of time focusing on the things that are not going right, but when something goes right, we need to celebrate that. We need to celebrate the wins. So you absolutely want to celebrate and create that team spirit, that team atmosphere, because that will help you in achieving more of a team spirit when you guys are, when you're all celebrating that type of win. Perfect. Does anybody have any questions? Could daily check-ins not be viewed as micromanagement? Why not every other day or once a week? Thanks. Okay. So that's a great question. That's actually a great question. And so people need routine. There's no question that we need to have a routine. So a daily check-in is not necessarily a daily check-in like, give me everything that you're doing, give me a full updated report. What I would suggest is maybe a 5-minute daily check-in, and maybe twice or 3 times a week, or maybe twice a week, you have more of a longer check-in, maybe like a 20-minute check-in. The check-in that I'm suggesting daily is a small check-in. It's just one check-in, see how things are going, see how things are just to see how you are. It's just a routine check-in just to say how things are going. I think that it becomes micromanagement when you start to ask them, like, what did you do? What is going on? They could literally just be a check-in, like, is there anything you need from me today? Or is there anything that you need to discuss? No, perfect, great, have a great day. You know, I'm here if you need me. It could literally be something like that quickly. It is just letting the people know I'm here. It's not to micromanage you. It's not to get a list of everything you're doing, what's on your agenda today. It's literally to say, I'm here, just checking in to see if there's anything you need from me or anything that I could do for you. That's it. So it's not micromanaging in that way. But if you're not comfortable with a daily check-in, maybe every second day a 5-minute check-in. But check-ins actually are very helpful to create structure and to create a routine. So I would suggest a daily structure, but if you feel like that's too much, adjust it to the way you feel is best for your team. Perfect. Is there any daily? Perfect. Okay. So do we have any more questions about how to effectively manage your team from home, like remotely? Any questions? We're good? Okay. Perfect. So since we do have some time, I'm just looking, so we do have some time, there is an exercise that I would like to share with all of you. Does anybody here on your team have people on their team who are struggling with anxiety, with stress, with fear? Thank you, some great ideas that I will implement with the team. Thank you, Brenda. Is there anybody here? So I'm going to just give you a tool to help people who may have people on their team who are struggling with anxiety or stress. This is anxious, stressful times. So here is one of the tools that I would like to give you. When you are finding one of your team members struggling with anxiety, with stress, with fear, it's to give them the platform to express it without any judgment. So become a safe place for your team members. Let them know that if they come to you, it is a stressful time, they are working from far, that you are there for them without judgment. So a lot of times when we work remotely, we feel very isolated, we feel very scared, very worried. And I just think it's really important to create that safety. And the way to create that safety is to understand your team, listen to your team, and be there for them. I think that's a key component to helping your team who are struggling with anxiety, stress, or fear, that you're a safe place for them, that they can come to you, and that there won't be judgment. And I think that a great technique, a great tool to help them when they're feeling anxious and stressed is to tell them to take 5 minutes, to maybe go for a walk, I think it's really important that people practice, especially during this time, for managers and for team members, to practice grounding. Practice ways for you to bring yourself back to the moment when you're feeling anxious or stressed, and just ground yourself. So when you're grounded, you're able to be more grounded for your employees. So I highly recommend people practicing grounding, and the way to ground yourself is to focus on what you're seeing, feeling, smelling, tasting, and hearing in the moment. So a great way to ground yourself is just come back to the moment, come back to your senses now, because that will absolutely help you and your team to come back to the moment. So when people are anxious, they're not productive. And that's why I just wanted to bring up anxiety, because when people are fearful, scared, stressed, they're not productive and they're not producing good work because they're anxious, they're stressed, they're worried. So let's bring people back to a calmer state. How to coach a team member who suffers from jumping to conclusions and mind reading, that's strongly aggravated in working from home. How to coach a team member who suffers is strongly aggravated in working from home. So the way to help somebody or coach somebody who suffers from jumping to conclusions and mind reading is to help them recognize the fact they're doing it. So the way to help coach someone who might be jumping to a conclusion or mind reading is to ask them this question. This is a good question, Leo, to ask the person. You say, what evidence do you have that supports that? So what you want to do is you want to help them find the evidence to support that. And in all cases, basically, they don't have the evidence when they're jumping to a conclusion, and to help them recognize, well, you said that Susie is mad at you because she didn't answer her phone to you. But what evidence do you have that she's mad at you? Well, she didn't answer the phone. Okay, but how is that evidence that she's mad at you? So for there to be evidence that she's mad at you, she would actually have had to have said, I am mad at you, for you to have the evidence that she's mad at you. So the best way to help somebody with a mind trap is to help them challenge the mind trap by finding what evidence you have that says this is true. Tony thinks I'm stupid. Well, what evidence do you have that Tony thinks you're stupid? Well, the way he writes in his emails are very dismissive. Okay, I understand. But how does that mean that he thinks you're stupid? So help them to challenge that thought, get out of their mind trap. What do I do? What do I do if a team member who tends to slack on work regularly does it even more now with home office? What do I do if a team member who tends to slack? So I'm gonna, Susanna, this, I'm gonna tell you, this sounds like a boundary. To me, this is a boundary issue I could see here, because what makes them believe that they could slack at work, and what makes them believe that they could slack even more at home? So for this one, I would set a boundary. And, I don't want to go completely in detail, but boundaries have consequences. But this sounds like this person needs a clear boundary, because when people don't have boundaries, this is what ends up happening. They end up, pushing limits, pushing things. So I would really encourage to set up a boundary, bring this up with the person and say, I really need this. If this doesn't happen, then this is going to happen. A boundary needs a consequence. But there needs to be some sort of recognition of what's going on, and there needs to be a boundary, because I don't feel good when people on my team don't deliver work or, slack off. I kind of feel like, well, what makes them feel or believe that that's okay? So there just needs to be a clear boundary and a clear list of objectives and what needs to be done. And I would try to work with this person to make sure that you're feeling respected and that they're feeling respected, because people don't feel respected when people are not being, slacking and stuff like that. People don't feel respected when that happens. So you want to make sure that everybody feels respected. So I would talk to this person, and I would set up some sort of discussion on how to make things work better, because that is not okay. To me, that's not okay. Slacking off is not a respectful, to me, it's just not a respectful thing to be doing. Perfect. Okay. I think these are great questions. Any other questions that anyone has? Perfect. So if anybody has any questions about anxiety, about teamwork, about working remotely, please feel free to write me. I think we are, I think we're good with the time. We have like a few more minutes. So please, if you want, ask some questions. Okay, perfect. Okay. What if it's your manager slacking? Okay, well, that is a great question. That is a really good question. What if your manager is slacking? So that's a good question, and it's an interesting question. It's unfortunate that I see this a lot, where there are managers who are slacking, and when managers slack, like I was talking about in this discussion, it sets a tone. So if your manager is slacking, this is what I tell people. I wouldn't make this about your manager. You can't control your manager. You can't control your manager slacking. What you could only control is what you're able to do. So what I think for me, I'm going to tell you, this is a very common situation that I see, is that the manager is slacking, the manager is not doing the work, the manager is nowhere to be found, the manager is not answering their phone, the manager is dismissive. I understand. But let's not make this about the manager. And I know that sounds easier said than done, but ultimately, the only person we are responsible for is ourselves. And we need to be able to differentiate between what our manager is doing and what we're doing. Because yes, your manager is slacking, and that does have an impact on you, but you can't control your manager. All you can do is control what you can do. So if your manager is slacking, that's on your manager. You can only control what you can do. And the best advice I can give you is to, even though it's challenging when you have a manager that's slacking, find solutions that you can do despite your manager from slacking, that you can still be successful in your position and get the work done that you need to do, which I know is easier said than done. But if you make this about your manager, then it creates this unhealthy victim mentality that you don't want. I'm going to be like clear. You don't want that mentality, that victim mentality, like, oh, my manager, because he's like this, I'm like that. You don't want that. So I would highly suggest that you take control over what you can do and not worry so much about your manager, because you don't have that kind of control. How do you calm people's fears and anxiety regarding return to the physical work environment? Great question. Okay, how do you calm people's fears? Okay, so that's a great question. How do you calm people's fears? So it's an interesting question because of the times we're living in. We are actually living in a time where we're being told to be scared and we're being told to be fearful. In normal times, I would say, what evidence do you have that you need to be scared? And I'm going to say that I would still stick to that model, because I know that the government and society is saying you need to be scared, it's dangerous, but you also have to look at probability. You also have to look at, well, what is, like, I can't live in fear. I can't live in fear. So there's always going to be something to be scared of. It happens to be right now, there's this pandemic that we are told to be very, very scared of, but there's always danger around us. So I would say the way to challenge it is to say the probability of something happening to me is quite low. And if it does happen, I can't control what's going to happen. I can't control, because if we have that mentality, then we're not going to go into our cars. Then we're not going to cross the street. Then we're not going to leave our house. So I would suggest the way to get over your anxiety and your fear is to watch the way you're speaking to yourself and try to become a comfort to yourself. What does that mean? It means tell yourself, we're going to be okay. And if we're not, we'll find a way to deal with it. But not to induce the fear by saying, okay, I got to be scared. I got to be scared. I got to be scared. I'm told I got to be scared. I got to be scared. Because fear is also dangerous. Fear also is going to stop you from doing things. So I would just suggest trying to look at the fact that there's always been something to be scared of. and we still have gone to work. There's been flus, there's been diseases, there's been accidents, there's been lots of things before this that we needed to be scared of, but because we weren't bombarded with it, we didn't think of it as much, or wasn't on our like thought process all the time. So just look at it like it's danger, there's danger, but there's danger everywhere. And I'm just gonna be careful. I'm gonna wash my hands, I'm gonna take care of myself, but I'm going to start to live my life, because that's what we need to start doing, is to live our life. What if a team member's role has changed considerably due to the new circumstances, as in their workload has decreased significantly? How do we set goals without necessarily having the same amount of tasks as before? I think that we need to set goals, and I think that we need to set new goals. I think that maybe there's something that they haven't done that they can do. I think it's important to have a goal to achieve. I think we need to work towards something. So maybe their job structure has decreased, maybe their workload has decreased, but what can they do? What else can they do? What have they not done before? So I think it's important to find other things that they can do. I think that what we need to be able to do is set up new goals, because yes, things have changed, but things can also change in different ways. So I would suggest, let's find new goals, let's find other goals, because ultimately people need to have goals, people need to have objectives, people need to find things to do to keep them fulfilled. And I would highly suggest that they look for other things that they can do. And I've had people who have significantly workloads, and they came up with ideas for them to have more of a workload. They've said, you know what, maybe I can do this, this, and this. So I would suggest some more objectives for them to be looking into, and not just say, well, they have less work, so their work less is less. They need to find other goals to do. How to apply balance, empathy, and focus when an employee in the team is struggling to balance their workload in addition to caring for their small child, so that they are performing at a fraction of how they normally perform. The way this is a question that has two parts in it, in that the empathy and focus, it's needed in terms of you need to show empathy to your to the person, to your teammate. You need to show them empathy. You need to show them that you understand. The balance is the second part. The balance is where you could use your coach style. So what does that mean? It means when you have balance, you are, the focus, when you have balance, empathy, and focus, you're still able to balance getting the person to do what needs to be done. So I would coach them saying, I understand, I completely get that you have this, this, and this, and this. What can you do to get this done? What can be done? You could even do some leading questions. So you could say things like, well, what do you think about maybe doing something in the evening? Would that be okay with you? Or because this really needs to be done. I completely understand the situation. So let's be flexible. Let's work together to find a solution. So I would coach them into helping them find the solution, but basically telling them, oh, I totally get it. Work on your schedule, or, I understand is not going to be beneficial to you, and it gives too much room to move. I would still be focused. I would coach them. I would do a lot of coaching, like, well, what do you think you can do? How do you think you can get this done? What would make things a little bit easier for you? So I would coach them, but still want that deadline, or still want that work done. So empathy, focus with a coaching style. So it's kind of like, with the questions, well, what can you do? Well, how does that sound to you? Well, maybe you could do this. Does that sound good to you? But still get them to commit to getting that project done. Any tips on onboarding a new team member in a remote work environment? Yes, make them feel welcome. So my tip is to do check-ins with them, to introduce them to the team remotely. I'm going to tell you what I've been doing. I would highly recommend it. Do a Senka set online. Do a little welcome meeting. Do a little fun activity with the team. So at this point, you want them to feel like a part of a team, and it's challenging to make them feel like a part of a team because they're just coming into the team. So bring them in. You know, that's what I would recommend. I do check-ins. I make them feel like they have you as a contact, and I would do some engaging team building exercises remotely. So you could still build your team remotely, just in a different platform. But I would absolutely do some team building exercises. I would do a Senka set, a welcome coffee, do something to make them feel like they're part of the team. Even though it's remote, there are still things you can do to make them feel like they're part of the team dynamic, but definitely be inclusive.
Sorry, my microphone was muted. It was a great question to wrap up our discussion. I don't know, Robert, if you want to take maybe one more question, or if we should finish for today.
Well, is there any more questions? And tomorrow is tomorrow the double duty? Tomorrow, which is the one tomorrow that we're doing?
Yes, tomorrow we'll be talking about balancing remote work and kids. So perhaps we can address more questions tomorrow.
Which is going to be a good discussion about also, you know, how to have boundaries, how to be able to manage a schedule, which is going to be a great discussion about also having boundaries, which is very important. So that's going to be a good talk. Does anybody have any questions? One more? We're good?
I think we are good. So thank you so much, Robert, for today. It was a great presentation and lots of advice. So all of us are going to now stay away from the mind traps and have a morning coffee with our team tomorrow morning. And then let's be all curious, right?
Yes. Let's be curious about our team. Let's ask questions. Let's be mindful. Let's be empathetic. Let's be flexible. We want to be flexible, but we want to be consistent. So please go back on the slide. There was a lot of little tips there that I would love for you all to apply, including really it's the engagement, the way you communicate, the laws of engagement, which is rules of engagement, which will really help you better engage with your team by knowing the way to engage with them. And we have a question, Ina. Okay, we have one.
No, I think it's just the thank yous and
thank
you tomorrow.
See, yes, come tomorrow. Come tomorrow. You've been a really interactive audience. My favorite part of doing these presentations and what I really miss about doing them live is the interactions and the questions. So please feel free to bring in questions, and we can have a really interesting discussion. So if you want more help with anxiety, stress, fear, have challenges with anything, please bring them. I'm here for that.
Thank you so much. And thank you everybody for joining us today, and see you tomorrow. Bye-bye.